Thank you, Meagan. Introverts can simply recharge and enjoy the peace and quiet. Felicitas says this isn't something introverts simply enjoy doing, it's something we need to do. I am Jeri Bingham. I'm host of Hush Loudly, the podcast and brand where we talk about all things introverted. And I'm pleased to welcome you to Introvert Plus, a discussion about the intersectionality of introversion and the multiple identities that define who we are. I'm asking the question, are any of us treated differently due to our preference for introversion alone, and or do the additional identities further impact how people receive us? For me, an introvert who is Black, female, living in an urban area, Chicago, I think I'm now considered middle-aged. The answer is yes. I'm misread, I'm misunderstood. I think I'm sometimes even discounted because of my introversion when it's paired with my race and gender and age. We're talking about this not to complain, not to vent, but to inform and to educate anyone who's listening, and also to share strategies on how we've overcome these misunderstandings in personal and professional relationships. On this panel today, we are Asian, Black, Latino, white, married, single, dating, living with significant others. We have children, we don't have children. The ages range from our 30s to our 50s. We are entrepreneurs, living our dreams, and executives making waves, from nonprofits and higher education to government agencies and corporate America. We're representing various states across the country: California, South Dakota, Texas, Ohio, Illinois, New York, and we're also representing the UK with one person from across the pond joining us today from London. I was curious about if the experiences is different for the Black Brit. So my friend Richard has joined us today. So we have the usual suspects on the panel, but we also have a couple new faces joining in the discussion, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and share whatever they'd like to share about themselves, what they do, what they're working on. And then I'd like for them to share what they did on New Year's Eve. Because as we know, New Year's Eve is a big thing. People are always asking, where you going, what you doing? Pre-COVID, even now, people are asking. So please, after you introduce yourself, let us know what you did on New Year's Eve. So let's start with Michael. You're first on my screen. Michael Segovia. Tell us
Thank you, Jeri.
what you did.
Sure, thanks. And hello, everybody, and Happy New Year. My name is Michael Segovia. I'm a senior consultant and certification faculty member for the Myers-Briggs company. So I actually certify people to use the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the strong interest inventory, and other assessments that are used in all kinds of settings, work settings, and so on. In terms of what I did for New Year's is pretty much what I do every year, and it's just the two of us, my partner and I at home. We struggle to stay up to midnight because I typically go to sleep a lot earlier than that. So we played Sorry, we played the Game of Life, and then we kept waiting and waiting, and finally midnight hit. We had our champagne, and then I went to sleep. So that was basically my New Year's, and that's how I would prefer it to be quite honest.
It sounds lovely. Richard, you're next.
Thanks, Jeri. Happy New Year, everyone. Richard Etienne. I'm marketing and communications expert, I guess I could say now. I'm currently the internal communications director at Elsevier, medical data and analytics publisher. I was also the former Prime Minister videographer, so official videographer to Theresa May while she was Prime Minister. And I'm also a filmmaker, award-winning filmmaker as well, documentary. I have a documentary called Shy Guy about introversion during the pandemic coming out very shortly. What did I do New Year's Eve? I had my son here with me, Kieran, and we are in our new home for the first time, and we stayed up and watched the fireworks together and drank fizzy drinks. Oh, you're on mute, Jeri.
Jacob, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you did on New Year's Eve.
Okay, hi everybody, Happy New Year's. I'm Jacob Marek, and I'm the founder and chief explorer at Introvert Travels. It's a travel agency that caters specifically to introverts and helps them explore the world in a way that's authentic and comfortable for us. And on New Year's Eve, I actually went to a small house party for the first time in several years.
What?
And toasted and had a little bit of champagne with my new boo. Which was honestly, it was the first New Year's Eve kiss I've had in many years. So that felt good.
I'm so excited about Jacob's new boo, and this is probably inappropriate, but just seeing all these pictures of him and his new sweetie, and it's just so exciting because on the last few panels, a few of us have still been single. So it's nice to see that one of us has a boo. So thank you, and I hope you're enjoying your fun with him.
Thank you. It started off really well this year.
Good. Cynthia, you're next.
Hi, Happy New Year. Happy World Introvert Day. My name is Cynthia Pong. I'm the founder and CEO of Embrace Change. We're a coaching and consulting firm, and we specialize in working with women of color with ambitious career goals, as well as mid-sized companies that really want to support their staff, especially their employees of color. On New Year's, I also similarly struggle to stay up till midnight. If I was left to my own devices, I definitely would have just slept at my usual like 10:30 or whatever it was. But I did stay up, and the one thing I did that I really recommend if you haven't seen it yet is I watched Nicole Byer's 1 hour special on Netflix. Yeah, it was hilarious as usual. I'm a big fan of Nicole Byer, so I watched that and almost forgot to stop to celebrate the new year because it was so good. But the timer went off, so we did. That's what I did.
Wonderful. Meagan, you're next.
All right, thanks. Happy New Year. Happy World Introvert Day. Thanks for having me, Jeri. My name is Meagan Connley. I currently work part-time for a data analytics company owned by Kroger. And in my spare time, I'm working on kind of finding my passion, finding some other projects and things that I can take on, and have recently gotten certified in something called Psych K. So we can talk more about that later. And on New Year's Eve, I watched a movie with my husband, and I'm in Eastern time zone, celebrated an hour early with Puerto Rico, and went to bed at 11. So that's what I did.
Sounds good. Christina, you're next on my list.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Steed. I am an award-winning communication strategist. I am a writer and a content creator. I'm a host of a podcast and platform called First Over 40. And for New Year's Eve this year, I was with my husband. We were Netflix and chilling, but we did kiss at New Year's Eve at midnight because we got engaged on New Year's Eve. So we always try to, make sure that we at least stay up till the time that he proposed, and then I went to sleep.
Beautiful. Next on my list is pretty boy Darrious.
The pressure. Hi, everybody. I'm Darrious Hilmon. I'm the executive director of Chicago State Foundation. One of my favorite jobs ever, because it allows me to spend time with some of the most resilient, resourceful, smart, deserving, young at heart people in the world. What I did New Year's Eve, Jacob, I think there may be two boos here. My boo's not as far along as yours. I know.
Mine is new, but
yeah, mine is on quarantine. So on New Year's Eve, he was on day 3. So we had a lovely conversation, and it feels old school AOL chat room good, because we started dating right before Omicron made her appearance. So we had 1 or 2 dates, and then we shut it down. So had a good conversation with him, really excited about the possibilities of what's in store in 2022 as far as that. And then at midnight, I remember my French Bulldog was here, sleep. My Havanese had his toy here. And I said out loud, what a great life. this is a great life and there's no place I'd rather be with you than with you two. And that was it. And then an hour or two later, we were in that position sleep.
Beautiful. Sounds lovely. And Keni, you're next. You're on mute, Keni.
Thank you, Jeri. Well, Happy New Year, everyone, and Happy World Introvert Day. My name is Keni Dominguez. I'm a career coach who specializes in working with Black women and women of color who have a proclivity towards introversion. I also am a people operations and HR leader who focuses on working with startups, small businesses, as well as nonprofit organizations. And I am based in the San Francisco Bay Area. For New Year's Eve, I have to be honest, I have never been a New Year's Eve person. I've probably spent most of my time at home for New Year's Eve. This year I did something a little different. I was just really grateful. The last 3 months of this year have been pretty tough for me. And I just wanted to make a list right before midnight of all the things I was really grateful for, particularly the way that your body can rebound back. So I kind of focused on that, popped some bubbly. My husband works overnight, but he works remote. So I just walked upstairs, we toasted, we kissed, and then I went back downstairs and watched some TV. And then I think I fell asleep downstairs. And that was my New Year's Eve. So that's what I did.
That sounds lovely. And I'm Jeri Bingham, your host and the founder of the HushLoudly podcast and brand, where we talk about all things introverted. My background is marketing communications, and my New Year's Eve is the same for me every year. I'm a big Twilight Zone nerd, and so the Twilight Zone marathon starts on New Year's Eve day and continued until this morning. So my TV is on that. And I'm also a list person. So I also made my list, like Keni, of everything that I was grateful for. And I have some other little rituals and things like that. So that's what my New Year's Eve was. I wanted each of you to share what you did on New Year's Eve, just to show how we're all different. Yes, we are all sharing introversion, but we're all on the spectrum at different points. And Michael Segovia is teaching me to stop saying that we are not introverts, but we have a preference for introversion. And because no one is 100% introverted or 100% extroverted. So I'd like for Michael right now, our Myers-Briggs expert, to give us a little detail about introverts. Tell us who we are. And then at the end, I want Michael to give us a little introvert love and just talk about the attributes and why we're so awesome and what we need to be focusing on to be our best. So Michael, tell us a little bit about introversion.
Sure, and thank you, Jeri, for bringing up that we are actually looking at a preference for introversion and not necessarily putting ourselves into that box of just being an extrovert or being an introvert, because we're more interesting than that. I liked Keni's language. Keni said a proclivity for introversion. That works for me as well. So when we think about extroversion and introversion, these are words that come to us from a Swiss psychologist named Carl Jung. And basically what we're looking at is this idea of how do we direct and how do we receive our energy? How do we direct and how do we receive our energy? Where people who prefer extroversion, they tend to act before thinking. They prefer to take action quickly. They like to talk things through. They tend to be more expressive when interacting. They gain energy from that interaction, and they tend to have a breadth of interests. Where those of us who prefer introversion, which I'm assuming is probably many of us, maybe we have those who prefer extroversion joining as well. On the introversion side, we tend to think before acting. We tend to prefer that time of reflection. We'd like to think things through. We might be more contained when interacting, and we gain energy from concentration, and we tend to have, instead of a breadth of interests, a depth of interests. And at the Myers-Briggs Company, we look at all areas in terms of differences between extroversion and introversion. And there are big differences in terms of preferred work environment, differences in terms of even hobbies that we might have, ways that we recharge. And those are differences that are important for all of us to acknowledge, for all of us to appreciate, whether we prefer extroversion or introversion, so that we can learn to live our true selves. If you're interested, we do have recent data from just a couple of years ago. This is our global sample, a sample size of 16,773 people from around the world that shared People who prefer extroversion represent about 43% of the global population. People who prefer introversion represent 57% of the global population. In other words, those of us who prefer introversion, we actually represent the majority. I think that's a decent enough overview, Jeri. If you need more info, please, anybody feel free to ask.
Thank you. Loving the new stats, 57%. So we're taking over, y'all. That's what we're supposed to do. So I wanted to start with a question just to sort of guide the conversation. And the first is, has there ever been a time when you think that you've been misread or misunderstood due to your introversion, whether it's personally or professionally? And I just wanted to just start by saying how it's happened to me at pretty much every job I've had where I'm misread and people think that I'm mean. I'm the furthest from mean, but I think that because of my lack of engagement personally with people in the way that they want me to engage with them, they misunderstand that as something else. I believe I'm just not behaving in the way that they prefer. And so I think they want me to spill my entire life. I think they want me to be curious about their lives, day one, week one, and I'm just not. I'm just not. I wish that we lived in a world where we could just show up as ourselves, and hopefully we'll get there one day. But in the beginning, it's always where I have to sort of prove and overprove why I'm there. And so I make it a point to, in the first 30 days, everywhere, I try to get a big win, whatever it is. And that kind of sort of eases, I think, people's fears. I shouldn't have to do that, but I do have to do that. I've had to do that. And so I'd like to know if, and that works for me. I'm okay with it because it also helps cement why I'm there. And it helps as I'm starting to figure out, what do I need to do to get promoted? What do I need to do to get the bonuses? And so by getting that big win initially and building upon that, that does help me further down the line. So does anyone else have, can you share when you think you've been misread or misunderstood because of your introversion?
Jeri, I think I have had the same challenge that you had, either in a professional setting or a personal setting, that people think because I'm quiet, I don't care. And I'm actually an emotive. So I pick up on other people's emotion and energy like very quickly, and it impacts the way that I function. So I have to come against that. The other thing is, and I was talking to you about this a couple months ago, when we kind of the world slightly opened back up and I was going out to professional mixers and gatherings and things like that from a professional standpoint. And I would do my thing, walk in the room, get my drink, be in the corner, kind of surveying the area, and people would come up to me. And previously I would be in my head about, well, I should be talking to people and I shouldn't be in the corner and I should be doing this, that. But I would text you and be like, man, I'm even more confident in being in this room at these networking things, which I hate, but being at these networking things and being comfortable in how I show up, and that what is for me will be attracted to me. So people will come and have a conversation with me. So I think the thing is, people think I don't care or I'm not engaged. And in fact, it's the total opposite.
And Jeri, I think for me, it's always been the case. And I'm like, it's a combination of things. I'm a 6'3" Black man, on top of being a gay Black man, on top of being an introvert who really introvert leaning, a proclivity for, that really has never gotten energy from. And I love people, but I don't get energy from them. It takes energy. So I've heard this consistently. When we first met you, to Jeri's point, I have to be uber qualified and really keep my head down and just say to myself, survive the 90 days. Even with this current job, survive the first 90 days and just be consistent about who you are. They will either get used to it or they won't, but you cannot not be who you are. So what I do to try to help that now is I'm very clear with people. I'm an introvert. I'm an introvert leaning. This is what that means. It does not mean what I'm going to hear, what I've heard for the first 10, 20 years. When we first met, you seemed aloof. You seemed distant. You seemed above us. You seemed a bit arrogant that you didn't want to spend time with us, or that you were just, it's all work, no play for you. So I think the combination of what Christina the Steed said about kind of, I'm 53. All of this is playing. I care less about what you think, which frees me up to be more honest about who I am. I have 25, 30 years of work experience where I go, I know the first 90 days is going to be, they're going to do everything in their power to try to get me to change who I am. I'm just going to do the work, get the win. And then right around day 150, people go, well, that's Darrious. But the part of me there, I was like, I don't have to tell you anything. I came to realize the compromise for me, I do have to be, for me, very clear about who I am. Because when left to their own devices, people's imaginations go to places that ultimately I can't win. And I still need to work with folks and have a good, a collegial relationship and those things. So those combination of things have worked for me.
The first time I took the Myers-Briggs type indicator, I answered with the mindset of who should I be as a new employee in a company? So I thought, well, of course I'm supposed to operate on that extroverted side because that's what's expected of me. And when I received my first results on the Myers-Briggs, actually that's how I reported. Because when you take the assessment, you're supposed to try to remove roles and expectations from work and home, just to answer how you prefer, as if you have nothing and no one to answer to. I didn't do that the first time because I thought I will not succeed if I come across how I naturally am. So I thought I need to pretend to be somebody that I'm not. And I think it's something that a lot of us who prefer introversion feel like we have to do. But as Darrious said, we actually need to live our true selves. That's when we give the best part of who we are. I see Richard's hand is raised. I'm curious to hear. I might have interrupted as well.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Michael. I just noticed my first ever manager just messaged in the chat. My Manuel was my boss when I was 19. Anyway, so I used to have the laid back label quite a lot because I wasn't the most forthcoming or vocal in meetings. And that stigma always seemed to crop up at the most inappropriate times. So like for bonuses, pay reviews, that kind of stuff. But the reality was that I was just focused on my work, and it was such high quality that I think they were just a bit confused how I managed to do it with such low stress. And actually fast forward to now, I've had my recent 360 reviews and so forth. A lot of my colleagues are actually saying that my calmness under pressure is actually helping them to stay cool. So yeah, that's quite an interesting observation.
Thank you. Meagan, do you want to share? I know you told me a little story.
Yeah. So, I mean, throughout my career in corporate America, I guess, year-end reviews and that kind of feedback has always been, you need to lead more, you need to speak up. Like, what does that mean? I don't know. Yeah, I feel like I'm leading and speaking when I need to. So the feedback didn't really land with me, but then there was one day where it was made really obvious what people were trying to say. I went to a lunch meeting. It was kind of just a networking thing. I was newer to the company at the time. I didn't know anyone. It was for a different resource group, and I didn't say anything the whole time. I just listened, kind of took in the content and left feeling like, hey, that was really cool. That was informative. And as I was walking out, someone stopped me and said, hey, I noticed that you didn't say anything in that meeting. So that probably means that you're pretty introverted. And, I care about people as people. And I just wanted to let you know, you might consider not working here because we really value extroverts.
Oh.
And I was just like, okay, like no one had ever said to me, you're an introvert and that's probably not a good thing. And so, yeah, I was shocked. So I didn't say anything back, but it took a while for that to sink in and like, what do I do now? What does that mean? Is he right? Like, I don't know. And it was just a couple of days later that I had found out about someone at my company starting a resource group called Itopia. So for introversion, bringing awareness to the bias that exists against introversion. I was like, sign me up, I'm joining. I want to be involved. I don't want anyone else to ever hear what I just heard. And so, yeah, our group has really grown and expanded influence across the organization.
And I think that's what a lot of us have felt. That person actually said it, but I think many of us feel it, and it has deep implications that, it's so much deeper than just that person talking, what that person said to you. So what about you, Jacob, Cynthia, Keni?
I think Michael actually had an interesting point about interests, that it kind of goes to people about having a depth of interests versus a breadth of interests. And so when it comes to personal relationships for me, I think that I actually have more of an interest in depth of my relationships rather than a whole breadth of friends and colleagues and contacts. And so I think that can kind of be seen or interpreted as me being exclusionary or off-putting or I don't know, isolating or whatever. And so for me, the challenge has been this past year, really, I've been trying to tell myself or urge myself to say yes to the invitation. Because when people ask you to do something, it's because they generally want you to participate. They want you to be present. And we could all get in our own heads, but I have come to, not some epiphany, but I'm just being more, I'm trying to push myself internally to say yes to the invitation. And I've been having, success and fun, maybe not saying yes to every invitation, but kind of fighting my natural instinct to say, okay, well, I would rather just stay home and do my thing tonight or whatever, and actually just going out and living. And you can always make a graceful exit if it's not your thing or whatever, but you can do it in a way that's comfortable for you, but just actually getting out there and socializing with people and, kind of fighting those natural inclinations to be more reserved and isolated, especially during the pandemic.
Yes, and you're an entrepreneur, and so is Cynthia, and so is Keni. And so I wonder if it's probably you all are past all of that. But when you were working because you work for yourself, but when you were working for companies, did you experience anything like the rest of us have?
No.
We still go to conferences and trade shows, and you're interacting with suppliers and vendors and clients from all over. So it's not we're completely isolated from the more traditional corporate side of things. But for me, in my past, in a more traditional corporate role, I feel the exact same way as others have said, where you're expected to be more vocal in meetings. And I think that the rewards go to those who do put out their ideas, whether they're good or they're bad. Just almost sometimes saying things with authority or starting the ball rolling, you get the credit for getting that ball rolling. And if we're in our heads, if we're not speaking up, it's perceived as there's nothing going on out there, when in reality, it just might be a longer conversation. I find myself following up with I thought of this and wanted to digest that. So I'll send a long email or memo out after a meeting just to kind of follow up on ideas that I might have had or elaborate on ideas that have come to me since then. So that's kind of how I manage that.
Yes, thank you.
Keni, did you want to jump in or?
No, I'm definitely happy to jump in. I think even if I look back internally when I worked internally for organizations, and even as a consultant, I still experience those issues now. And there's still a certain amount of dialogue that I have to have sometimes with with clients as a consultant. When I think about introversion in general, I like to think about it as less of a personality type and more of how I experience the world. And so while I may not just come out directly to a client and say, I'm an introvert and, this is XYZ, I definitely do have to have those conversations where I'm like, hey, this is my work style preferences. This is how I typically communicate. These are the channels I would communicate within. How do you like to communicate? This is how I like to conduct meetings. I had to have a conversation with a client recently. We have a weekly status call, and I noticed they kept on the day of the call, 10 minutes before, they kept adding 10 new things to the agenda. And I'm like, wait, hold on, let's push the brakes a little bit, and taking the time to explain why that isn't the most effective or productive way for us to have a meeting. and like how, like if we had an agenda in advance, like how that can help us like actually get through the items that we want to get through, and why that is also going to benefit the client. I think those same strategies work and have worked for me internally, like being able to have those conversations with your direct manager, or even just colleagues that you work with, and explaining to them, taking them aside and saying, hey, I noticed, you're wanting to have like these impromptu meetings with me. I want to understand a little bit more like what's that about, and I want to see like what makes the most sense in terms of how we can work together, or how we can get this project off the ground, and so on and so forth. But I think for Black women in particular, women of color who also tend to lean more towards introversion, that's like a whole other nuance layer that we have to kind of navigate. It's almost like a tightrope, because there's so many other things that are happening in the background aside from, just issues around misconceptions around what it means to be, introverted, or lean more towards introversion. And so I think challenges that I can think back towards internally working in organizations, a lot of times I might have been misread as, not wanting to be as engaged, or not being seen as a team player, because I much prefer to kind of go off on my own and do some work, do some thinking, and then come back to the group. And I have to even kind of guide my clients that way too, and say, I'm not necessarily going to make a decision today, but this is when I can give you a decision, or this is when I can get back to you. Like just being clear about expectations, I think goes a long way in terms of sharing like how you expect to work, and how the relationship can work better, just so people can also understand you. I think unfortunately some of that burden lands on us as folks who tend to be, leaning more towards introversion. There is some education that we have to impart to individuals to understand us better, so that we're not so easily overlooked for things like promotions, or higher compensation. We're not getting bogus performance review feedback that's not actionable or clear. I think Meagan had just mentioned as well, like that was terrible, the way that feedback was shared. I just think that it's just such a challenge. But I think over the past year and a half, people are becoming more familiar what it means to be someone who is leaning more towards introversion, and what that looks like in the workplace, and how the workplace itself has transformed a bit to kind of help us adapt, and really just succeed in the workplace too.
And if I could jump in, I think to everyone's point, and there are marketing experts here, when I started thinking of myself truly as a personal brand, and one of the most important things about a brand is the consistency of the expectation. So when I started thinking of it that way, the things that I have skill set in, I stopped being as offended that I had to over-explain every dang on thing. Well, are you in a bad mood? No, I'm not in a bad mood. Why aren't you talking? I don't have anything to say. Well, everybody should take a turn. Why should everybody take a turn? They don't have anything to say. Why are they doing it? So I think once I started thinking of it, if the company is worth having a brand and a strategic plan and consistent message points, certainly Darrious Hilmon, the individual, is worth that. So when I think of it that way, it is easier for me to say to folks, here's how I receive information. Here's how I give information. This is what's going to happen. So then they can go, say what you want to. It's not inconsistent with his brand. He told you who he was, what that represents, how he receives information. Do with that. So once I've done those things, then I just do my job. I can't, at 53, I just don't have, we can't use that word here, but I'm out of them. And the pandemic, what the pandemic has allowed me to do, I see so many silver linings in it. No is a full, complete, unfiltered, it's good. Sometimes I use Delta, Omicron, and them as my best excuse when I just don't feel like over-explaining myself. I go, it's just not safe to be out. Good day. And then that's it. So I think brand consistency and there are experts here who do that for companies. I think that same approach has to happen to us, especially as introverts, because people really don't understand that important, fabulous piece of brand that is you.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more, because at this point, because I talk about having a preference for introversion so much that I had people almost coming to me being like, apologizing for their extroversion or something like that. I'm like, it's fine. It's not a judgment. I'm just sort of totally proud of who I am or whatever. But at this point, I feel like I've lived like 3 lifetimes of my relationship with introversion, because like to the introvert plus point that Jeri, you're bringing up, which I think is so cool. Like as a kid, I didn't really have much of a consciousness of being a big introvert, and people just thought that I was really quiet or meek or cold. And I think that was because I grew up in white suburbia and people just read me as like, you know, an Asian kid, an East Asian kid or whatever. And so that the race and gender piece of it was what was really interpreted out of there. And then when I was a public defender and I worked in a large organization within an even larger system, I absolutely had to put aside my introversion to do my job, because it literally was like I had to speak up for all my clients every single day. So in that way of like externalizing, the only impact it really had on me was that I felt very tired. Like I was really drained by always having to deal with a whole bunch of different things in court, talk to a judge, talk to the prosecutor on the side, like explain to my client what was happening. And so there really wasn't much of a chance, honestly, for me to like stop and think about things. And so sometimes I started closing my door to my office, which we had like little shared offices. And that made me feel like I was being really antisocial or rude to people. But after a while, it's just like, I can't deal with another interruption. I feel like I'm losing my mind. So that was kind of like the second lifetime I've had doing that. And then I went and started my own business, which I think to Darrious and other people's point is because I was literally like, I just want to work by myself. And so that worked out great. The biggest challenge has been, and I'm still on this journey, but figuring out how I present as a speaker and a CEO in spaces where I feel this pressure to have to entertain and like put on a show for people. I'm still trying to figure out where I am with that, because a lot of times I will overcompensate and put on a big show for people in order to help educate and motivate them. But again, I then am exhausted for like the hour after that, you know, and I don't love it as much. So I'm still sort of figuring that out, but there's also ways to Manamar's question and the conversation about like branding and stuff. There's so many ways to build a super strong brand, whether you're a salaried person or you have your own business. Like writing is a huge one that I've leveraged. And I recently found out I have like 3,000 backlinks to my website, which is bonkers. No. But like, that's because I've done so much writing and like done so many like podcasts or press pieces or whatever, where I'm not having to speak up in meetings. So it's totally doable. Just find what works for you now and just like sit on it, like Darrious is saying.
Love it. And so you, Cynthia and Keni, have started the conversation that we really wanted to talk about, was the intersectionality of introversion plus whatever. So I know, as I said, I've experienced different things because I'm an introvert, because I'm Black, because I'm a woman, all of these things where I think that there are so many stereotypes, and I think what people believe the Black woman should be based on what they see in media, TV, I don't know where people get it from. But when I come in and I'm none of those things, I think it's held against me. I'm a mystery. People don't understand me. They maybe think something's wrong with me, and it's all based on stereotypes. And so my curiosity led to this panel, thinking about the panelists and how we are married, we are gay, we are different races and ethnicities. And so I wondered, and even Richard in the UK, because they seem a little more conservative. Again, I'm watching TV. I've only been to London once, but it seems like that the UK is a little bit more conservative, and I would guess a little more introverted. And so that's why I have this panel to ask people, What is it? Tell me how it is for you, and the intersectionalities of your introversion plus your identities. So who would like to jump in on that?
I can jump in really quick. So I identify as a Hispanic gay male. And I will tell you, growing up, there was always this expectation that I was going to be out on the dance floor singing and dancing and living in that Hispanic extroverted energy world. And I could do it. Like Cynthia, you mentioned, you can sort of amp up for those presentations. We can look like we prefer extroversion. However, there's a real drain that comes from us when we feel like we have to do that. So when I was young, I could do it. However, what you would notice is one minute I was there, the next minute I was gone, because when no one was looking, I would quietly slip out of the room, go into another space all by myself, and then take that breath. Oh, good, I can be by myself until, and this happened to me every time, somebody would knock on the door, they'd open the door, oh, there you are. And then they would ask questions like, are you not feeling well? Are you upset with something? So I grew up believing that something was wrong with me because introversion was defined as not feeling well or upset with something. So there was always this expectation that I had growing up. And I'll admit, I still have it now. I've moved back to San Antonio the last 4 years where I grew up. And my family expects, even during a pandemic, why aren't we getting together? Like, well, because my sister has COVID, we can't come, so there's this expectation to come together that it's just not really what my preference is all about.
So I'll share that I think for me, my coping mechanism or to get through is to play small. And that's like the worst thing that people can do on the road to greatness is playing small at work so you don't outshine the master, the CEO, or whoever, or playing small in your group of friends so you don't, people don't think away. So that's been something that I can see it as a pattern, is playing small so that I'm more accepted. And as Darrious has said, now I'm in this glorious, to age where I'm getting beyond that and seeing the beauty beyond wanting to be perceived or accepted by certain people based on how they move in the world. So that's definitely something I'm on the path of unlearning right now, so that as I move forward and on this next journey, this next half of my life, what does that look like? And bringing my full self with introversion, with quietness, loving books, loving, whatever, to the rest of my journey.
I think for me, the intersection where introversion is shown a lot in the workspace is gender, because I've worked in comms most of my life. And when you move into like the internal communication side of things, it's predominantly a female dominated space. And if you think about it, so what, 10% of the global internal comms network I'm part of is male. But because of the unfortunate societal norms that gender holds in the office, men's voice is prioritized. So I remember being in meetings where I'm like usually the only male, there's one other male in the room, and people would often defer to me. But I'm as to Michael's point, I'm the one that sits and processes and listens to everyone else's point. And while some found it refreshing, others actually misunderstood it for a lack of understanding of what was going on, or even a lack of leadership. So that's where the misunderstanding in terms of intersectionality for me is definitely sat. I haven't even gone to race, but like gender's been a big piece for me.
Yeah. And it's weird, Richard, what you just said. I have had the sort of the opposite experience where they have different, I sort of mix and match them. Being a Black male that's 6'3", I work in marketing and development, a female driven business. So where if a white man were to speak and there's kind of everybody gets in line, I speak and people go, and if I don't smile, I mean, literally inside schmides as I'm doing it, people go, why is he so angry? I feel nervous. I mean, why is he screaming at us? I'm not. But then I find out once those same folks go, but he's gay. okay, I can deal with the male part.
Mhm.
And then we get to another where we go, oh, but the Black part, oh, I expect a certain sort of gay. To Michael's point, I go, no, in this order, I am a Black gay man in America, and all that means in sort of that order of things. So I think sometimes I found that if I move things around and just work with my toolkit, I think Christina and I had this conversation recently. She's gorgeous. If I were that gorgeous, I am not going to allow people to not let me use that. I'm at the age now where I go, I'm going to use that. It's in my toolkit. So sometimes being gay where I can sit down with a female and in a way that's not threatening and have a conversation, I use those tools. Sometimes, I'm dating someone right now, well, dating adjacent of a different race. And our first conversation was, I'm Black. And he was like, what does that mean? I'm like, I'm Black. I am not going to be the only anything in the room. I don't tolerate diversity. I insist on it. I'm past even embracing. We're going to be talking about DEIA on our first dinner day. I said, what does that mean to you? What does it mean? I'm at the point now where all of these tricks and tools, being a Black male, being gay, being an introvert, I'm just going to use them all and mix and match wherever I need to get the result that I want for me. But for years, I would find that they were constantly competing. This, too much of that, too little of this, too much of this. They're scared of me because I'm this. I'm nervous because of that. And now I just go, how do I take the beautiful ingredients and use them to my advantage? And part of it is taking away the suspense. I'm the first one going to say it to you. I'm in therapy every 2 weeks. We are doing the work. So I'm coming in every day. Yeah, we're doing the work. So I'm going to tell you who I am with a straight face. It's up to you to handle that, but that's no longer going to be my problem. I'm just not doing it. And I find that the more I do that, the more people are actually drawn to that authenticity. And that, to Cynthia's earlier point, I have board members now to say to folks, no, he's not extrovert. He's introvert leaning. I know he just danced on the table for us, but then he was tired when he was done. So, and Jeri knows this is a fact. So I just find part of it is if I want the world to do something for me, I've got to at least lean in a bit more and go, here's who I am. There's shared accountability in this experience. So that's kind of where I am. But yeah, those things are always, it feels tightrope-ish and constantly going, good gosh. I've worked at all Black organizations, all female organizations, and one of those things intersects and causes havoc if you're not really careful.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I mean, this is why Darrious is the MVP of these panels, right?
Yes.
That was so good. I talked a little bit about this already before, but the only thing I'll add is that and to what Michelle is saying in the chat too, self-awareness. So I'm hyper aware of the fact that because people read me as East Asian and Asian American and an Asian American woman, I get a lot of benefit of the doubt. The stereotypes against me are by and large like good ones, like she's smart, I wear glasses, she's just thinking about it, like she's so serious, but like in a good like gravitas way or whatever. So there have been ways that like I can strategically use that at times, but I'm also aware of, is it being used in a way that is then taking up more space that should be going to a Black woman or a Black person or Indigenous person or a Latinx person or whatever that may be. So those things are always on my mind. But for me, the way that the introversion intersects with my race and gender, I don't have it as hard as most other people of color, I would say.
And Keni, could you talk about the triple-barreled thing?
Yeah, no, I think Cynthia was onto a really good point because, and I've saw several people also mention it in the chat as well, that some of our cultural experiences play into like just different introversion perceptions. Like, for example, Cynthia just mentioned some of the stereotypes that are associated with her being, Asian American. For me as a Black woman, being perceived as introverted, in the workplace, it's a very different experience for me. But also, I just want to highlight that what I have noticed for like Asian women who also show like a preference towards introversion, it's almost expected that that is, or assumed that that is the default preference in the workplace. And the way that I've often seen it like manifest in ways where, they're not necessarily seen as the leader, or they end up stuck in middle management, or like looked as like kind of like the worker bees, the people who are responsible for the work, but they're not really getting much credit for it. From my perspective, I can be misread as just not being engaged or being mean, similar to Jeri, like what was mentioned, or just disengaged, not being a team member, unapproachable. And while we have similar experiences, it's still, there's like these nuances between the intersectionality of gender and race and how we experience it in the workplace, and how our identities shape our experiences overall in the workplace. And I think once you're looking at race, gender, and cognitive type, it's what becomes really interesting about it is this triple barred experience that we have. It's very nuanced and it shows up in very different ways for us. So oftentimes, like as a Black woman in this body, I don't really know all the times like where some of these stereotypes are coming from, because if you're telling me I'm unapproachable, or I'm not team oriented, I don't know if that's coming from the fact that you are basing that off of me being Black, or me being a Black woman, or me being someone who has a preference towards introversion. And that becomes very confusing for me as a person who is experiencing some of those biases in the workplace. And it's just really interesting because when you look at cultural bias in the workplace overall and how it's experienced by Black women and women of color, what I've noticed is that if you even look at things like the wage gap, right? What happens when you add on top of that preference for introversion, right? Does that mean that not only as a Black woman am I already making less money or less compensation, but on top of that, if I have a preference for introversion, does that mean I make even less money? There's so much more impact to be unpacked, if you will, that I think really needs further study. I think we've been mostly focused on introversion, but like, how does that play out when we start looking at the intersectionality of our identities? And I think if we really do some deep work on that, what we can see come up is that it just exasperates certain disparities that we already experience in the workplace triple. Mm-hmm. And so that's essentially one of the things that I really want to focus on. And I have a white paper that is literally in draft mode that's talking about cultural bias. So it's one of the things I hope to finish in the next coming months.
Thank you. And we are running out of time. Does anybody else want to say anything? I had all these other questions, but I think this was so great. Anybody want to add anything else before we close out and jump to Michael? I did want to say, and I don't mean to put Meagan on the spot, but I am putting you on the spot. I've also often wondered when I'm in the workplace and, I know there are all of these stereotypes, and so they expect me to be more aggressive or louder or living my life out loud and all of these things. And I think about when I see someone who's Caucasian, who's like me, and I say, well, they just think she's a nerd and they just leave her alone. So why is it that I get this separate treatment? Why is it that all of these expectations for my behavior are on me, but not on her? And so I wanted to ask Meagan, do you see that, or have you experienced anything? Do people leave you alone other than that person who I don't like, who I don't know, who said that to you? But do you see any other things?
No one has ever said the B word to me, but sometimes I wonder if people think that's what I am, because I don't want to have lunch with everyone and I'm not, friendly, warm girl. Like, I'm not the one that's out there just making friends with everyone. I think in general, I don't know, women are supposed to be perceived as being warm and friendly and like nurturing. And if I'm keeping to myself, I'm not showing that I have those skills. Like I've been called moody before, hard to read, like, so
Okay.
I don't know if people think I'm nerdy, like maybe that's part of it, but I think it's more of like, she's cold.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to our lovely panelists. I love you so much. You bring so much to these conversations and to me. I want to thank our audience for supporting us and tuning in. There's more to come. The second Black Introvert Week is February 8th through 15th, and I'm hosting a panel called The Introverted Black Woman, featuring the fabulous Keni Dominguez, Christina Steed, my friend Colette Brown Rogers, who's listening in today, and me. And it will be moderated by the gorgeous, stunning, spectacular Mr. Darrious Hilmon. He will be our moderator. So stay tuned on Hush Loudly, on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all those places. Thank you. And we'd like for Michael to wrap it up. And if you want to stay on an extra 5 minutes and hear what Michael has to say about introverts, Michael, tell us why we're so fabulous. Just give us some introvert love on World Introvert Day as we exit out.
Sure. And first though, Jeri, thank you for bringing us all together, for really getting that introversion energy, making it happen, making this event happen. And Darrious, the weight on your shoulders, I hope you're gonna let go of that weight and just be you, and don't worry about all the pressure to be as marvelous, because you're marvelous anyway. You don't even need to try. Some things for those of us who prefer introversion to think about. What we bring to the table is we actually listen. And when we listen, that means people are heard and people are seen. I remember being in an Apple store where the salesperson would not stop talking. And I thought, boy, I'm not feeling listened to at all. So when you listen, and those of us who prefer introversion, that's what we tend to do. We hear people, we see people. We also then, when we listen, we don't interrupt people. So then we see them and we hear them even more. And then finally, one point that comes to mind is early on in my career, I was in a meeting with all of these very important authors and I didn't say a word. And the president of our company pulled me aside. And instead of saying, wow, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you say anything? Instead, he said to me, I bet you picked up more than a lot of us because I noticed you were listening and you were watching. What can you tell me? And I was able to give all of this information that nobody had ever brought up. And so those of us who prefer introversion, when we honor our preference, we can bring so much to the table. One final note, and I just wrote it down. We need to stop thinking and feeling like we need to prove our worth. We need to prove ourselves because what we bring is by far more than enough. Thank you, Jeri, again. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, and happy World Introvert Day. That means you're supposed to chill, don't do any work, lie on the couch, sip on some old champagne, sip on some beer, do whatever you want. But this is your day to chill. So chill on World Introvert Day, and we'll see you again in February. Hey, Colette, I see you.
Thank you so much, Jeri.
Thanks, Jeri.
We love you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Jeri. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.